Okay, everyone, I would like to welcome you to the regular meeting of the Garden City Planning Commission. This is Thursday, September 10th, 2020. We're having our meeting held via electronic webinar. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and our first order of business, if you'll join me to pledge allegiance to the flag, please. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United
States of America,
and to the republic
which stands
one
one
nation,
nation, under God,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty and
justice
justice for all.
Thank you. Would Secretary take the roll, please?
Chairperson May,
Here.
Commissioner Steenberg,
Here.
Commissioner Turnbull, Commissioner Hunt. Oh. Hey, Eric.
Hey.
Hello.
Hello, Eric.
We're in the process of taking roll. If you want to continue.
All right. Commissioner Turnbull,
Here.
Commissioner Hunt, Commissioner Walls,
Commissioner Walls asked to be absent and excused. He'll try and join the meeting before it's over.
Commissioner Kalidas,
Here.
Commissioner Mativier.
Here.
Okay, thank you. We have a quorum. So our next order of business is approval of the agenda. If I can have a motion, please.
Make a motion to approve the agenda.
There's support.
Support.
Motion's made and supported to approve the agenda. Take the roll, please.
Commissioner Steenberg,
Aye.
Commissioner Mativier,
Aye.
Commissioner Kalidas,
Aye.
Commissioner Turnbull,
Aye.
Chairperson May.
Aye. Next item is approval of minutes of the regular meeting of August 13th, 2020. Any corrections or comments on the minutes? Hearing none, can we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting of August 13th.
Second.
Motion's made and supported. Any comments or questions? Take the roll, please.
Commissioner Turnbull, or Commissioner Kalidas,
Aye.
Commissioner Turnbull,
Aye.
Commissioner Mativier,
Aye.
Commissioner Steenberg,
Aye.
Chairperson May.
Aye. Next item is public comment on non-agenda items. If there's someone that's joining us that wishes to comment on an item not on the agenda, would you please identify yourself?
It's like we got an empty audience.
Nobody's in the audience. Okay.
Now, excuse me. You say we have an empty audience, but under participants, it shows 9.
Well, that's us. That's our panel.
Okay.
Yep.
And the city of Garden City counts as 1, huh?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Any in the audience would show up in our attendees list over here, to the right of panelists there.
Okay.
Well, hearing none, we'll move on to the next item, business items. We have no business items, other business and discussion. Zoning ordinance amendments. We have 3 amendments for discussion tonight. So if we could take those one at a time. Mario, you'd like to start us off?
Yes. Good evening, everyone. So tonight, first thing we'll kick off with is the medical marijuana uses proposed amendment. This was before you last time. And excuse me, sorry about that. Also, let me know if I'm loud enough or if you, and feel free to interrupt me as we have this discussion. But basically, the issue is, just to remind you that previously, caregivers, which are those individuals that are licensed by the state that are allowed to grow plants for patients, can grow up to, if they have 5 patients, they can grow up to 72 plants. That's 12 plants for themselves, for each patient, plus 12 plants for themselves. Prior to April, these caregivers could operate anywhere they choose, because based on case law up to the appellate court, they were allowed to just operate wherever they so felt. Then the Supreme Court reinforced the city's powers to say, no, the city can choose where to locate. So because the Supreme Court reaffirming the city's rights, council would like Planning Commission to take a look at this issue to see where caregivers could go. And the main issue is the fact that 72 plants is a pretty substantial volume, at least in terms of its impact on adjacent property, only because we've had issues with things like transformers burning out on a block because of the energy demand. And then it also impacts the size and space used in any area, because while they can be small, these plants sometimes can be large. So they tend to sometimes be occupied in a house and then have no resident. So that's another issue that sometimes has been found in the city. So last time was my first attempt at showing you something. Basically, the idea would be, originally proposed, was to allow caregivers to operate in the M1 district, where they would have to control wastewater, odor, security, and then required to have a site plan review and approval, and of course acquire their state license, just like our facilities, our commercial facilities. The last time, I also had some, in paragraph 1, 4 different requirements for the location. So the first being located in M1, the second being they have to abide by all the setbacks that the commercial facilities would. Third, the idea that that they wouldn't be able to be located adjacent to another lot that already had a caregiver. So this was the idea that to spread them out and to not occupy a large percentage of the industrial. And finally, only have 1 caregiver on site. So with that, you guys were very concerned about the quantity. So because of that, Jason, if we could bring up that map now. So we created a map, and then the language, I think the first thing to be aware of is the fact that what are our current setbacks? So they are 300 feet from any residentially zoned property, 300 feet from Ford Road, 500 feet from any park, and then 500 feet from any school. And these include properties that are not located in the city. So basically in Westland, a lot on the other side of Illinois, they have single family zoning. And then they also have the, I think it's the Lutheran school is a school located directly across from Intex. So because of that, this map in front of you is intended to show the current setbacks for commercial facilities, and the idea that the caregivers would also have to abide by these setbacks. So once again, it might be a little hard to read, but the black line that kind of looks like Iowa is basically the setback from residential schools, parks, and Ford Road. So, and I'm not sure how much it comes through, but there are several parcels that are outlined in orange. And those orange parcels are parcels currently zoned M1 that are outside the setbacks and could, in theory, be occupied by caregivers. So it is a large amount, but I guess it's not, the whole, it doesn't operate the totality of the industrial district. So if For example, the other two standards, they can't be located adjacent to each other, and they'd only one allowed per site, were not imposed. They could have a variety of parcels to be located on. But with that, I was wondering what people felt about these location requirements. Once again, if M1 is okay, and then what kind of setbacks you'd want to see, and if you'd want to have any additional distance requirements from each other. That's really how most communities have dealt with it. And so that's why they're in front of you tonight.
Question.
Mhm.
Yeah, Mike.
Are we going to have currently, prior to the Supreme Court making their mention of the cities having the power to regulate, we probably have a number of places in the city where caregivers are growing in residential areas. Are we going to have an enforcement issue here? Or do we already have one?
So if you'd like to, there is a strategy for this. Number one, Mike, is you're right, that if we only passed, if the city council only passed a form of this ordinance that we're looking at tonight, then it would be, right now, it would only be for all new caregivers coming in. So new caregivers coming forward would have to abide by these new standards we're creating. And then in theory, they'd be located on these orange parcels, let's say.
So they'd be grandfathered even though the Supreme Court changed their ruling on this.
Correct, right now. However, I'm aware of, and I'm suggesting as an option for the city, is there's another way, and it's worked in other communities, that you can deal with existing caregivers. Basically, the city also has the power to adapt a second ordinance. It's not a zoning ordinance, it's what's called a general law ordinance. It's just like all the other police powers the city has. And they would pass an ordinance that says every caregiver in the city must apply for and receive a certificate of occupancy and a business license. And a requirement to achieve a certificate of occupancy and a business license is to comply with all zoning. So in that case, and then they can also put in a sunset that says every caregiver in the city must be operating with a C of O and a business license by whatever date the city council chooses. It could be 90 days from date of adoption or 6 months, whatever, given a sunset in which all the existing caregivers have to come into compliance. So the effect would be, if we adapted an ordinance in the zoning ordinance that says they can only be an M1, the only way a caregiver could legally operate if the council adopted the second ordinance would be to abide by the zoning and therefore move into M1. So that would be the strategy as an option. And I think the council, I'm not sure what their opinion is on that, but there have been some negative impacts from some of the operators on adjacent properties. So that's why they're considering that.
Myself, I'm going to lean heavily in that direction of drawing a moratorium on this and having a date certain, 90, 180 days, because when we opted into this initially, I don't think we envisioned having grow houses in the city, and conceivably more than one grow house, or having transformers that were severely overloaded and caught fire based upon what was happening inside the home that wasn't a residential type use, it was more of an industrial use. So we need to look closely at this and bring this into an area where it's not going to impact neighbors and it's not going to impact our electrical grid in the residential area.
And right now, the city, if you recall, the city did pass a moratorium on all new caregivers. So in theory, no one's supposed to establish. Now, the problem is that in the single family district right now, there's no requirements for a C of O or a business license because we were operating under the appellate's ruling. So right now, it's still kind of, for lack of a better word, the Wild West, if you will, in the
Wild
residential.
West, yep.
They have to come in and get other permits, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. But if they aren't requiring, if they think in their head that they don't need extensive electrical rewiring, and if they don't, abide by ordinance requirement and coming and get a permit, they could be doing what they want to do. And right now, there's no enforcement well, the only enforcement is if, in theory, they said they started operating, last week, and then we could say we are not supposed to be operating because of the moratorium. But right now, the enforcement options are very limited for both ordinance and for building department.
Anyone else have a comment or question? Well, no one else does. I have a question. When we discussed this at the last meeting, we talked about caregivers and people who used the medical marijuana being able to grow 12 plants in their residence. Are we talking about restricting that for caregivers and not allowing them to have any plants in their residence?
No, because the other law, the third medical law, the MRTMA, the Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana Act, allows every adult resident in Michigan to grow 12 plants. So as long as they're a resident of Michigan and they're over 18 years old, might be 21, I can't recall. They're allowed to grow 12 plants, and the only restriction is they can even grow them outside in their yard. The only restriction that we have right now is that the plants cannot be seen from the public right away. So we do have some instances where people were coming in saying, I can see the plants growing in my neighbor's yard from my backyard, but that's not the public right away. If it's from the street and they can be seen, then as long as they're not visible, then they can grow them outside. Now, the other issue is technically they're all supposed to be grown in a secure area. So if they are grown in a yard, in theory, they should be in a gate with a lock on it. That's the only requirement. So
If I can interrupt you a minute, if we're going to do that, shouldn't we say that when we're saying that caregivers have to grow their plants in M1 district, can we say that caregivers growing more than 12 plants?
yeah, we could do that. That's a good one.
How do we codify these two laws? Because basically one overlaps the other.
In terms of the recreational and the 12,
Yeah,
I think Fred's solution is probably best because recreational statute is kind of like a state law that is a right given to all, residents. So it's not something related to zoning. But Fred's suggestion, I think, is good because then we can make sure that the caregivers aren't restricted by but they're just referencing they're not restricted by what we're creating. So they would, as long as being a resident, they still have the right to 12 plants anywhere. But what we're saying is that caregivers that have more than 12 have to abide by this ordinance.
okay.
A quick question, Fred.
Yes, Eric.
Is this caregiving, isn't this considered a type of business? I mean, if you're in a assisted care or assisted living, that's considered a business that's licensed. Is this caregiving with the patients and this absurd number of plants being allowed? Wouldn't that be considered a business, and shouldn't that be licensed? Shouldn't that be registered with the city? And most importantly, shouldn't it be on the tax roll? Wasn't that the whole theory behind legalizing this, was that it was going to be taxed and it was going to be just like alcohol, a recreational drug?
Well, I don't know. It would depend, I suppose, if they were charging their patients for the marijuana that they're providing, or they're just doing it for a friend. Then if they're charging them, it's definitely a business. If they're just providing for a friend who doesn't have the ability to grow their own, then it's just a good neighbor, I guess.
I see. Okay.
Marielle, do you have a thought about that, or?
Well, yeah, basically that's the intent of the caregivers, is that they are supposed to be providing a service to those residents at near need of marijuana for medicinal purposes and don't want to or choose not to grow it themselves. And so they need a place to grow it. And up until this point, the state didn't provide us any direction and they kind of restricted us. Now they're abiding by zoning and allowing us to zone it the right way. So yeah, this way there'll be a licensed business that's operating, and
that anybody growing for more than one patient is running a business.
right.
Maybe someone with 12 or less plants growing it might be doing it as just a service for an acquaintance.
Recreation.
Yeah. Well, I had one other thing about the requirements here. The map kind of scales down the amount of area in M1 that is usable for marijuana activities. And to further scale it down, we're saying that they can't be adjacent to one another. I'm wondering why you really think we're going to have so many that it's going to run everybody else out of industrial park?
Well, I wasn't sure. Definitely the version in front of you right now with all 4 requirements is pretty restrictive. I guess the only thing about it is that it could be like how we started with our commercial ordinances and all the ordinances before, that the idea that we'll try it out initially and then see if the impact is great. If the impact is minimal, then we can expand them. But right now, Fred, you're right that if we only, this map shows the parcels that could be located if just the setbacks were required. So if only A and B in your draft language were applied, and that's what it was adopted, every parcel in orange could have a caregiver on them. So whether you want that, I mean, that's not.
Well, we already have several large businesses operating in addition to the 3 major properties that we've assigned for marijuana growers. So that's really going to cut down the availability to any kind of a lot. If we're moving them out of residential area, I think we need to give them a certain amount of room to operate. This is not a great deal of space. I would personally like to see C and D eliminated. I think if we include A and B, that will take care of the issues that we seem to be having as far as large grow operations in residential areas. We'll be back to just allowing single user growth in a residential area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. And you're right. I think that's why the map is pretty telling, because obviously nothing in those two buildings up on Manor Park would be allowed to have marijuana growers. Nothing along Block would have marijuana growers. I think that's important because it's across from residential. But then it does open up the opportunity along Park Lane. The rest of the parcels on Industrial Drive, and then possibly some of the parcels in the back on the east side of Hubbard.
Well, some of them are
Yeah.
already restricted by the current marijuana. You know, if we included C, it would be restricted by the 3 commercial growers because they take up a lot of space, and anything adjacent to them wouldn't be allowed.
Correct.
I don't know, what does everybody feel about that?
I don't see that as a problem. I would just assume the garden in Garden City be known for something other than
Marijuana.
a weed. Myself. I mean, for those that wish to use it, that's fine. 12 plants is a pretty ample amount for somebody. And if somebody's got up to 6, is doing this for up to 6 people, I'm kind of guessing there's probably dollars and cents changing hands.
Well, they would
So-
need that to be able to afford to rent a building to do it in. So that's kind of understood that they're going to be charging people for it if they're growing for more than one patient.
Yes. So putting them within the outline of Iowa there, I think makes sense. I'm sure a lot of people in the city use recreational marijuana, but I'm
Oh,
not
we're
sure.
talking about recreational.
Well, I know, but when recreational is allowed 12 plants and a caregiver is allowed 12 plants for each person under his care, we're almost talking about the same numbers across the board. That's why I'm trying to think of a way to codify this. And I like the idea of if a caregiver is more than one person, then they can get a business license and look for a building.
Right.
Well, we're saying that, yeah.
Yeah,
We're just not, I'm just saying that I don't think we need to restrict it, saying that they can't be in adjacent buildings.
I agree. I
Okay.
would like to see C removed.
okay, yeah, that'll work. Let them be in
Okay.
adjacent buildings if they can make that work in the industrial park.
So are we saying that, now on my example here, D is already crossed out. We're saying we should cross out C also?
Yes,
And that in the language requiring them to be in industrial park, we say if they are going to grow more than 12 plants, they're required to be there.
Yep.
and at the same time, I think we should put something in there to create a moratorium so we have a date certain in the future.
Well, I think the city has already done that.
They have a temporary moratorium on everybody. But there's nothing in our ordinance that says within the next 365 days or 180 days after the current temporary moratorium ends, that you need to get a business license and move your operation for more than one caregiver to the M1 district.
That's correct, and that's actually because the zoning ordinance doesn't have that power. Like, you guys can regulate location and setbacks and everything else we normally regulate, but when it comes to timing and licensing requirements, That's going to have to be a separate ordinance that the council will have to adopt. But
Okay.
it's definitely part of the strategy that we worked out, that it would go simultaneously whenever language you guys recommend for approval. At that time, we can also submit standard general law ordinance language that would have those things that you just mentioned, Mike, the timing
So,
and the requirement for a business license and a C of O.
yeah, so we have to do our part first. Okay.
Okay, so Mario, are you clear about what we're talking about now?
Yeah, so what I have down in terms of changes to what's in front of you is number one, add if caregiver is growing more than 12 plants, then they must abide by the following ordinance requirements, meaning being an M1,
Right,
and all the others. Two, we're removing paragraph 1C, and then three, we're moving paragraph 1D, moving both of those.
yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
Are we all good with that?
Yes.
Sounds good here.
Okay, should we have a motion now to set a public hearing for that? Or do you just need a recommendation, Mario?
You can make a motion to, I guess, Brian, I don't know if you want a motion or,
What we can do, because there's the two other possible zoning amendments. If we want to discuss, the other two, and then if we want to set a public hearing for the next meeting for all three, we can do it under one motion. Or if you wanted to do one in a motion, one in a motion, one in a motion, you could do that option as
Well,
well.
we can do them all together if that'll work.
Okay.
Okay, so let's go on to Amendment B, shared parking. Mario?
okay, so this is to address some of the issues we've been facing when applicants come in front of us for their new use. And also it's something that I encounter when I review C of O applications for new tenants inside existing multi-unit buildings. Basically, it's just the fact that right now, when it comes to parking, the language current in the ordinance says that any building or group of buildings that use the same parking lot, the required parking has to equal the total minimum of all the uses together, combined together, 100% of all that requirement. That can work, and that usually is the easiest way to do it. And however, in most municipalities, they also have a standard that allows for a type of share, which basically factors in the hours of operation or the type of use. And that's because the main obvious, the typical example is when a multi-tenant building has, like say, 2 offices and 2 restaurants. The offices are open 9 to 5 and the restaurants are open that are busiest at the evening. So then you see a shift in the need for parking. At 5 o'clock, all the office people go home, but then all the people come to the site for parking. So rather than having still large open space, the intent is to factor that in with what's in front of you. So basically, these amendments are intended to first kind of combine and remove some of the duplication in this requirements on pages 2 and 3 about requirements for a shared parking agreement. I just eliminated some of that language and put it into one location. Cleaned up some of the requirements in terms that was duplicated in terms of storage of wrecked vehicles, making sure it's there but not listed twice. And then on page 4, the bottom of page 4 and the chart on page 5, this is the shared parking language, and it's a method to calculate basically, like I said, a reduced number of total parking required on a site based on a mix of the uses. So that's the intent of it, to allow for that. And it's it does reduce it, but it doesn't really it's not a drastic reduction. If you look at the chart on page 5, you know, they still require, depending on how it works out, you know, 95% of the requirement for most, 70% of the restaurant. I know it's kind of a complex, it's not readily seen because of the way we calculate it. And this is how the Institute of Transportation Engineers came up with this methodology. But it does tend to work because it seems to be business friendly, but it also allows for that idea of not requiring an extensive amount of parking for all the uses. So I was wondering what people thought about this strategy.
Well, I guess I kind of like the concept of shared parking. This seems to be a little bit complicated is the only issue that I had with it. Have you used this kind of formula before in other cities?
I have, and it does take some getting used to for the applicants because it is kind of, you do have to go through this calculation and multiplying out every single column. I was looking for some other more straightforward examples, but pretty much everybody uses this because once again, it's adopted, it's been tested by the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and they're the ones that, for example, all these numbers that are in our ordinance now for the one parking space for every 300 square feet of retail, and one space for every 150 square feet of service, and all these charts. That's done based on studies that the Institute of Transportation Engineers has done over the years. And basically, they go out and they look at every type of use and they analyze that. And so those quantities are vetted. Some of them are old, so that's why we might have to take a look at those again. But then also this method is something that, like I said, is endorsed by them, and it tends to be in a lot of different municipalities. And it's how it's, like I said, it is kind of hard. It takes some getting used to for applicants, but in the end, they appreciate that we're like trying to accommodate them because we know that finding space for all the uses is kind of difficult at times.
Yeah, we always have a problem with that, it seems. Does anyone have any comments or questions?
No, if you've used it before and you see it has a practical workability, I say let's go for it and we'll see how it works.
I agree.
And the good thing is that it's standard, not that it's standard, but it's familiar to other planners and other architects. So at least in some communities, so at least that way we're not trying to reinvent the wheel per se, because I actually did try and think of, right, there's got to be a simpler way, but it's kind of, it seems intuitive, but for some reason, there's no other way to make it simpler. If I find a simpler one, I'll definitely bring it to you guys later on. But for now, this is the best we can hope to
Yeah, I
work with.
guess we can always go back later and modify it or find a new system if one comes up. But this seems to be the best we have right now. Anyone else have a comment?
Maybe when we put it into practical use, it'll be a little more clear to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, everyone in agreement with B, amendment B?
Yes.
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 Now, we can move on then to amendment C, residential design standards.
Yes, so we talked about this a little bit last time before any language was in front of you. And so beginning on page 6, I first revised a little bit the definitions we have for different dwellings, because that's some of the issues we've had in the past has been dealt with manufactured versus mobile homes. Also, the fact that the industry over the years has tried to get away from mobile home as a concept, and they keep calling them all manufactured, but then people get confused because technically, like a modular home or manufactured home is pretty high quality, but it still sometimes has a negative connotation because they can be very, just like boxes, they can be very simple. So that's why on page 6, they're just trying to clear up that language and saying specifically that mobile homes are reference to the Mobile Home Commission Act of the state. And then even to clarify it even further, even though it's not really used, I just had a definition for a site-built dwelling, a traditional stick-built, one piece of wood at a time, normal home, just for clarification for people.
Yeah.
And then there's the fact that, once again, interrupt me at any point in time. Then beginning on page.
While we're still on definitions, I'd
Yes.
like to talk about that because I don't think our definitions, and even the way you've tried to bring them up to date, I don't think they fit with current law and current definitions for mobile homes, manufactured homes, and modular homes. It's my understanding, after trying to do a little online research, that mobile homes, according to federal law, are now called manufactured homes since 1976, when they changed some laws and provided standards of how to build mobile homes. Before that, there were mobile homes and there were no standards. But those manufactured homes are now all have to have a HUD certification label attached to them and have to be built conforming to HUD Title VI construction standards, according to what I've read in several places. Modular homes are also factory built off-site, but are built to local and state building codes, such as the ones we have with site-built homes. And that's the primary difference, those two sets of standards that these two products are built to. I think we should change our definitions to reflect that terminology and those standards.
No, Fred, that's great, because that's something that we always wrestle with when it comes to differentiating them. And I think utilizing the code as to what is the standards that they're built to is probably like a really clean and easy way to differentiate it. So I like that. So that's definitely something I will take back and make a change to.
Okay.
If everyone else is okay with that.
I think we need to recognize that both are factory built, but they're built to different standards.
Right.
One is the HUD Title VI standard, and the other is the local and state building code.
Mm-hmm.
The standard that I was familiar with prior to your HUD Title VI was if the dwelling had axles and or wheels, it was a mobile home.
Well, that was typical.
Manufactured homes were all put on a foundation.
And a mobile home can be too.
Mhm.
Those wheels are generally removed and they're put on some kind of a foundation. Whether it's just blocks or a regular foundation, they can still be put on a foundation. They take off the hitch and they pull out the axles.
They have to. That has to be done. You can't put them up any other way.
Yeah, but in order to control the use of the mobile home, so I like what you've done in requiring them to be in a mobile home park.
And all you guys are right, because Mike, that's the way I know that the state has tried to deal with it in the past. The idea that, and that's why the definitions in front of you right now reflect what's been done in the past. And I didn't change them at first because it's a traditional way we've tried to differentiate the fact of it's a chassis. But then Fred and Eric, you're right too, that what happens is he gets to the site, they take him out. And so a lot of times these residential design standards used to talk about the skirting and the fact that the axle has to be removed and it has to be skirting around the bottom and all these other things. Ours doesn't get there because people have advanced beyond that because it's kind of a standard requirement. And I think the idea of moving to definitions that use the current terminology is important. And then Fred, like you said, factory built either to HUD standards or a factory built to local and state building code. I think that's a very simple differentiation. And then and the reason I wasn't getting into that too much is just because sometimes it's hard to make that the differentiation. So that's definitely something we could do. Probably one thing we'll have to do too then is, Fred, to be keeping with the right terminology is technically we have, I believe, we have a separate section for the mobile home park. So we might have to go through and just change that language in the mobile home park district to manufactured home park. So that way we're consistent throughout the zoning ordinance. So
Yeah,
that'll be
because-
just a cleanup thing.
Yes, because technically they haven't been called mobile homes since 1976 officially.
Right.
Hmm.
And initially I was thinking, well, maybe it's okay to leave it because of the fact we don't have one. But I think you're right, to bring the ordinance in line and be compliant with federal standards, it'd be best to clear up that distinction.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay,
All right.
you want to go on?
Sure. So then, beginning on page 7, I go into making changes to the residential design standards. So the city does have residential design standards, and they are once again relatively typical of how we've tried to address some of the basic issues. But now the fact that almost every home abides by these issues when they're constructed is not a problem because all builders know these things have to be done. It has to be in a foundation, have to connect to utilities. It has to be used specifically for residential dwelling, as a residential dwelling. So a lot of this language changes beginning on page 7 is about making it consistent, referencing all residential structures as dwellings. And then trying to make sure that right now I'm going to use the old terminology, the manufactured and the mobile home dwellings. Making sure what they can and can't be, what standards can be applied to them, because mobile homes, when they're placed in a mobile home park, have their own set of rules because that's by state statute. So we'll still be in compliance with them. It's just I was trying to clean that up. But then as moving forward, beginning on bottom page 7, paragraph 7, compatibility with other residences, I beefed that up a little bit just to try it, but using still generic language and talking about that new dwellings shall be aesthetically compatible in design and appearance with other residents. Character shall include an element to various things like the windows, the wall colors, color combinations, type of materials, architectural design elements, and then within 1,000 feet. So the idea of when a home is constructed, if it's a modular home, that it has to fit with the neighborhood and broadening that neighborhood to 1,000 feet. So I'm not sure how you guys feel about that, if that's too large or large enough.
Question.
Mhm.
Before we finish with the bottom of page 7, do we need the words mobile home under A with compliance with design standard?
Well, right now it does say including manufactured dwellings and mobile home dwellings.
Yeah,
Shall be
that
directed
that should be changed to
modular and mobile home.
modular and manufactured.
Yep, I will definitely change that throughout the ordinance.
Okay.
But Mike, you're concerned about the mobile / manufactured homes being applied. They are, and it's kind of a subtle reference because we reference that they have to abide by it, but then we also say that modular homes are only allowed in mobile home parks. So it's kind of like, technically we don't really have to do that, but it's a suspenders and belt situation where we say, yes, if they were somehow outside of mobile home park, they would have to abide by this, but they have to be in manufactured home park. So, but it's there right under paragraph A.
On Ox Street, just west of Middle Belt, one of the nicest homes in the area is a manufactured home, a factory-built home. They brought the bottom box in, then they took a crane and put the top box in because it's 2-story, but then they did a stick-built garage and added it on that's perpendicular to those other 2 structures. And more recently, they've done a stick-built front porch, covered porch. And it's a beautiful home.
And Mike, actually, that's a perfect example because right now in our ordinance language, those things you included, having a porch, having a garage, it's not a requirement right now. So this draft language in front of you would require things like a garage under paragraph 14, a front porch on paragraph 15, this idea of somewhere there being space for storage on paragraph 13. So those are the type of things that are normally found in homes in the city and currently aren't required of new modular homes or stick built. So this would require that every new home being constructed would have a garage, front porch, and storage area. And so that's kind of a big change. So I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Now, when we say front porch, I don't know if anybody recalls, it's north of Cherry Hill and east of Middle Belt. There was a manufactured home, I'd call it a mobile home, put there, and they put a fiberglass porch with hand railing in place like they would have in a mobile home park. The neighbors were up in arms about it, but we didn't have language to do what the neighbors wanted done there. So the fact that they put up this fiberglass porch with a metal hand railing qualified as a porch. To me, it didn't qualify because it had no footings, it had no foundation, and it was temporary in nature. So how do we include that in with our definition? Because you could buy a dozen 2x4s and technically make a set of steps leading up to a mobile home and call that a porch, but that's not a porch in my opinion. A porch needs a footing.
Section 15, if you go down, addresses porches and says they have to be concrete.
Yeah.
So I was trying to find a way to require that, and because I know we don't have too many of them, but for homes that are more of, I guess, I'm not sure what kind of style you'd call it, but where you have to walk up, say, 5 or 6 flights of steps to get to the main floor, and then with a porch in front. Sometimes that's hard with a porch that high to have the floor be concrete, but because I know normally our homes are only 2 steps up from the main floor from the grade. But I did include the idea that the floor had to be concrete. Because some of the other concerns people have is if we allow them to specifically say they could be wood, then people go and make basically a deck and not have something around, a skirting around the perimeter. So that's why I included the language that says,
So the fact that we have the word concrete in there, that would necessitate a footing and a foundation.
and maybe that's a better way to define it, like require a footing and a foundation for the porch. Because I think at that point, it kind of implies it. I don't know, maybe I need to talk to the building official about the building standards to see what
I
language
think you
can be
do,
used for that.
Mario. I think you need to talk to the building inspector because there's a number of wood porches with skirting on them in my neighborhood. So,
Yep.
Yeah, a lot of people have just built decks on the front of their house.
right.
Yes,
That's basically
there's a
what
number in
it
this
boils down
neighborhood
to.
too.
Yeah, that's pretty common.
Yeah, so I don't know, I grew up with a wood front porch and back porch, but they were porches. They didn't look like these decks, because I know what you're talking about. It's like a deck.
It needs to be enclosed, and
Yeah.
it does need, I think with a footer and a footing around the outside and then enclosed in some manner, whether it's lattice or cladding, whatever, it needs to be closed off. You don't need to see underneath it because then it's a deck. If it's not enclosed, it's a deck.
Right.
Can we go so far as to require a masonry structure?
We could, I don't know. I was a little apprehensive about that specifically, so I kind of split the difference by saying it has to have a concrete flooring. Because of this the idea of allowing some people to have freedom to have a real porch and not a deck. I get the feeling that maybe if I speak with the building official, he'll be able to tell me how the code would require a porch and not allow a deck. And then so that way people would have options, because like the house you talked about that was 2 stories modular, is their porch like I said, like more like not a stoop, but only 2 feet off the ground?
It's almost even with ground level, so
Yeah.
we can't use that example. It's not applicable. But my concern is if you put stanchions in the ground or supports for a porch, those most generally are in concrete. They can use concrete blocks that have a receptacle for the 4x4, but that could be an excuse for saying, if you poured the concrete and put them in the ground like that, could be an excuse for saying, there's my foundation, there's my footings. So
Just because
I like the idea of the concrete, but I think maybe we should go to the building department and get their definition of what constitutes a porch, because there's a number of decks in my neighborhood as well, and they look like decks. They're on stanchions, and some of them don't even have any skirting or anything. You can see the stanchions or the 4x4s with the wood deck. And
they've been okayed in my neighborhood, and they basically built them right over the crumbling concrete or the crumbling brick porches. They've put the wood over top of the concrete and the brick, which if without skirting, you're still seeing the crumbling concrete or the crumbling brick. It needs to be a standard, but Mario, that's been allowed to happen through the building department, or at least it hasn't been enforced for not pulling permits. We have a limited amount of coverage by we only have so many inspectors, so they can't be everywhere. And but there's a number of them I can see from my front door that are built right over top of the old porches, and it's done in womanized or it's done in deck wood. Some of them are plastic wood, and that there needs to be a standard. But our building department we need to check with them before we start dictating code.
Yeah,
I think we should leave this one out for right now and get better detail on what constitutes the porch.
Okay.
I wanted to go back to the section on compatibility with other residences. Are we saying that they have to be basically the same as the residents within 1,000 feet? Because we have situations where somebody built a really nice house in a not so nice neighborhood.
Oh,
And I guess that wouldn't be compatible with the other houses.
True.
Plus, we're pretty subjective here, and how do we get beyond that?
yeah, that's the problem with this standard typically, is it is kind of a subjective thing. That's why it's kind of broadly written.
Can we put a percentage in?
You could try, but then I think it might impact what Fred's issue is that it's a good point that, like, if the existing houses are of one style or quality, and then someone wants to raise the quality, even though this is intended to make sure that everyone is of high quality, it might be misinterpreted and might require them to build a lesser house. It just kind of defeats the purpose. But some communities
are encouraging nice houses, but I don't know how we can do it in that case without limiting some people.
Right.
Well, I think we need to work on that language and the language for the front porch. So I'd like to see us leave item C off for right now and move forward with A and B.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I wanted to go down to landscaping.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because I like that idea, but if we're going to have a tree, I'd like to see it in the front yard, not the rear yard. So I think it should be required in the front.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it sounds like a good idea.
Excuse me for a minute.
Would you want to have one in the front and one in the rear?
Not necessarily, but I mean, typically people's backyard's been pretty open to interpretation, I guess, for, what they want to do with it.
Right.
They're not going to want to plant a tree if they're going to want to put a pool in later,
Yeah.
If we make it look nice from the street side, that's primarily what we're looking for.
That's a good point. And generally, that's what we're trying to do, is make sure that the public face of the house is welcoming and very attractive. And then the rear is supposed to be your personal space. Do with what you will. So, yeah, so I'll just change that so it's required in the front, and that's it.
And the last one, 17 mobile home dwelling regulations, they shall be required to be located in a mobile home park. That's, I can go along with that.
Yep. And as I said, I'll definitely change all mobile
Although
homes.
that would have to be now manufactured home.
Manufactured homes.
Yep. Okay.
But maybe we need to hold off on Amendment C until we can get some guidance from the building department.
Yeah, and so I'll talk to our building official, and so he can give me some guidance as to what code language can be used to require a real porch versus just a deck in the front. Or even like Eric, I think you had a good point, requiring that there are no existing porches removed. Like if you're going to replace it, fine, but take out the old footings and you have to dig them all out, just not cover them up. I think.
Yeah, porch.
Yep.
If you're doing a porch, it has to be, you know, there's one porch,
Yep.
not a porch over a porch, because that invites unwanted visitors.
Yep.
Lack of a better
Yep.
term. So,
Yep. So are there any other issues with the standards right now?
Does anyone else have another issue?
No, I'm good.
Good, Randy?
I'm good.
Mike? And Eric? You good, Eric?
I'm good, Mike. I'm good. Yeah, Fred, I'm good.
Okay. We need a motion to, with corrections, we have these A and B ready for a public hearing.
Do you want to complete C and then go to a public hearing?
Well, one
Hold
thing,
off
just
until the next meeting and get some
No.
more clarification on C?
What would be your preference, Mario?
well, I was just going to let you know that there are definitely some other ordinances that I wanted to speak with you or present in front of you. So I wasn't sure, but then the council is very interested in having the medical marijuana dealt with from the caregivers.
Yeah.
So maybe if we had a public hearing in October for the medical marijuana, then that'll get
Oh, I think we could
Deal with
include
that.
shared parking too.
Yeah,
oh, and shared parking, yep. And then hold off on the rest because at the next meeting, I envision other ordinances that'll get brought in front of you because there's a laundry list and I didn't want to give you guys 10
all right.
all tonight. So I just thought making them in more bite-sized chunks might be acceptable.
So Fred,
So you're looking for a motion for parts A and B, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
I'd like to make a motion to schedule a public hearing for the zoning ordinance amendments on Part A and Part B
With corrections on A.
with corrections as noted.
Support.
Motion's made and supported. Any comments or questions? Secretary, take the roll, please.
Commissioner Steenberg,
Aye.
Commissioner Kalidas,
Aye.
Commissioner Mativier,
Aye.
Commissioner Turnbull,
Hi.
Chairperson May.
Aye. Okay, next item is Commissioners' comments regarding planning and zoning matters. Mr. Steenberg?
What do we know about Kmart and LA Fitness?
Right now, two things actually. One, they still are of the opinion that they're not going to start construction until the governor allows people to go back to gyms. And actually, because of that, right? Yeah, but then, so that was their last stance, and then they said, well, they're just going to start in the spring. They're going to wait now because of the proximity to the inclement weather. They're going to wait till
Sure.
spring and start then.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
as a side note to let you know, we're trying to get them, and I think DPS might just go and do it themselves, to move that fence. So that way people can exit and enter on Ford Road and then drive to the rear of the buildings and most importantly, Hershey Shoes, so they can have direct access from Ford Road. So they said it was okay, I believe. So we're trying to get them to do that. Once again, get the fence moved. So just as an update.
Also, Dunkin Donuts. What do we know about that?
I haven't heard word one from that owner in quite a long time. So I think between the money he spent in Livonia and now with COVID, I guess he hasn't approached us at all.
Has his site plan expired yet?
I would venture a guess. I can double check and make sure, but it was approved prior to even me coming to the city. Yeah, it might be, but I
I'm
will check.
pretty sure it has, yeah.
It's expired at least once.
And we reach out to him and see if he would like us to renew that site plan for another year, to encourage him to move forward with that when he's able to.
Yep, I can do that.
And I see Checkers is coming along nice and McDonald's put up iron.
Yep.
That's a good thing. That's all for me. That was about four and a half years in the making, Randy.
I think you covered everything.
Yes, it was.
Eric, do you have anything?
No, I don't.
Diane?
Nope, I'm good.
Randy?
No, I'm good.
Okay. The only question I had was about the Orange Jewelers property. Do we know anything about what's going to happen there?
Nothing yet. He still is the owner, and as far as I know, he doesn't plan on selling it yet. I know that the gentleman that's trying to refurbish the Moose Building has been trying to get him to agree to a kind of shared parking agreement there, which is a little different than what we talked about tonight. And that's more about just allowing the Moose customers to park additional cars somewhere, so that way he can increase his capacity. That's part of his reasoning for not continuing with the redevelopment of the building. He's trying to find parking there somewhere because his existing parking would only give him, I think, 100 customers, and for some reason that's not enough. So if that, actually it'd probably be less than that, because he only has 35 spots, I think, behind his building.
Has he approached Allstate? Allstate
Yeah.
has some pretty limited hours. I mean, they have not a lot of parking there, but right adjacent to its building.
Yeah, he's spoken to them, and I think they're not too willing. And he's spoken to the Chinese restaurant, but they're not willing to put anything down on paper, which is a requirement. So
Yeah.
The one issue with Oren's closing the doors is that he also owns the vacant parcel to the south of is that Pardo, I think, and the other on the opposite side. And so the ability maybe to redevelop that as a parking lot, if he sells it, is a possibility. So it would be a large parking lot, decent sized parking lot for that quadrant of downtown that could service the business.
Adjacent to the cable station?
Yeah, I think in between the cable station and the medical
Doctor's office, yeah.
Yeah, doctor's office. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't have anything else. I see McDonald's is coming along pretty good now. They just poured the floor of the building, so I'm sure walls will be going up soon.
Yeah, once they get that iron up, it moves pretty quick.
Yeah. Okay, well, our next regular planning commission meeting is Thursday, October 8th, 2020. And if we have no more business, I'll accept the motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Or
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank
All
you.
right. Have a good
Thanks,
evening.
guys.
good night, all.
Good night, all.
Good night, everyone.